Have you ever looked out of an airplane window and suddenly realized something? You're sitting inside a machine that weighs hundreds of tons. It's moving faster than most race cars. It's flying higher than Mount Everest. And somehow, it all feels completely normal. But the moment you stop and think about it, questions start popping into your head. Why are airplanes almost always white? Why are the windows that shape? And what exactly is that strange hole in the tail? Here's the part nobody tells you. Some of those features exist because people died. Others save airlines millions of dollars every single year. And one of them is already working before the airplane even leaves the ground. Today, we're answering the airplane questions that millions of people have wondered about, but rarely take the time to investigate. And trust me, some of the answers are even more fascinating than the questions themselves. So let's start with something you've probably seen hundreds of times without ever questioning it. Question 1. Why are almost all airplanes white?
The next time you're at an airport, take a look out the window. It doesn't matter whether you're in Lagos, London, Dubai, Singapore, or New York. You'll notice the same thing. White airplanes everywhere. It's almost strange when you think about it. Cars come in every color imaginable. Trains, buses, ships, even private jets are often painted in bold colors. So why are commercial airplanes almost always white? Surely airlines would want their aircraft to stand out. Well, they do, but not enough to ignore simple economics. The first reason is heat. An airplane can spend hours parked on the tarmac under direct sunlight before it ever takes off. Dark colors absorb much more heat than lighter ones. That heat doesn't just make the cabin uncomfortable. It also warms up sensitive equipment inside the aircraft and forces the air conditioning system to work much harder before passengers even board. White paint reflects most of that sunlight away. The airplane stays cooler, the cooling system works less, and the airline burns less fuel. Now multiply those savings by hundreds of airplanes flying every day. Suddenly, paint color becomes a serious business decision. But that's only part of the story. Airplanes undergo constant inspections. Maintenance crews are always looking for cracks, oil stains, hydraulic leaks, corrosion, or tiny signs that something isn't quite right. On a white airplane, those problems stand out almost immediately. A dark streak or small crack is much easier to spot against a white background than against dark blue or black paint. It's like giving engineers a blank sheet of paper instead of a busy photograph. Then there's a third reason most people never consider. Airplanes change owners surprisingly often. Many aircraft aren't even owned by the airlines that fly them. They're leased, sold, transferred. A white airplane is basically a blank canvas, quicker and cheaper to repaint than one covered with a complicated design with multiple layers of color. When you're operating a fleet worth billions of dollars, every hour spent repainting an aircraft costs real money. So while passengers may never notice, airlines certainly do. It's funny, isn't it? Something as simple as the color white quietly saves money, improves safety, and makes aircraft easier to maintain. And that's something you'll notice throughout this video. In aviation, almost nothing exists by accident.
Question 2. Why are airplane windows round? And what is that tiny hole at the bottom? Now here's a question with a surprisingly tragic answer. Because the shape of an airplane window changed aviation forever. Back in the early 1950s, the world was introduced to something extraordinary, the de Havilland Comet. It was the world's first commercial jet airliner. Compared to the noisy propeller planes people were used to, the Comet felt like science fiction. It flew higher, faster, quieter. Passengers loved it.
Airlines rushed to buy it. It looked like the future had arrived. Then, without warning, several comets broke apart in mid-air. No severe storms, no explosions, no obvious explanation. Entire airplanes simply disintegrated at cruising altitude. Investigators were stunned. To solve the mystery, engineers carried out one of the most remarkable investigations in aviation history. They placed an entire aircraft fuselage inside a giant water tank. Then they repeatedly pressurized and depressurized it again and again and again, recreating years of flights in just a few weeks. Eventually, they found the culprit: the windows. The Comet used windows with almost square corners. Every time the airplane climbed to cruising altitude, the cabin was pressurized. Every time it landed, that pressure disappeared. Those repeated pressure cycles concentrated enormous stress into the sharp corners of the windows. Tiny cracks began forming, too small for anyone to notice. Flight after flight, those cracks grew silently, until one day the metal simply couldn't hold together anymore. The solution turned out to be beautifully simple: remove the corners. Rounded windows spread stress evenly around the entire frame. No weak points, no concentrated pressure, no cracks. That's why every modern passenger aircraft uses rounded windows today. So the next time you're looking out at the clouds, remember, you're looking through a design that exists because engineers refused to let history repeat itself. Now, while we're still looking at the window, look a little closer. Near the bottom of the inner pane, there's a tiny hole. It's so small that most passengers never notice it. And once you do, you'll probably check for it on every flight from now on. A lot of people assume it's a defect. It isn't. Every passenger window is made up of 3 separate layers. The outer pane takes almost all of the pressure from the altitude difference outside. The middle pane acts as a backup, and the inner pane, the one closest to you, is mostly there to protect the other 2 from bags, hands, and accidental damage. That tiny hole is called a bleed hole, and despite its size, it does 2 important jobs. First, it equalizes the air pressure between the window layers, making sure the strong outer pane carries almost all the stress, exactly as it was designed to. Second, it prevents moisture from being trapped between the panes. Without it, your window would constantly fog up, making it nearly impossible to enjoy the view. One tiny hole, 2 invisible jobs, working perfectly on every single flight.
Question 3. What is that hole in the tail of the airplane?
Let's move to the back of the aircraft now, because there's another feature almost everyone notices, but very few people can explain. If you've ever boarded an aircraft using the rear stairs or simply walked behind one on the airport ramp, you may have noticed something unusual. Right at the very end of the tail is what looks like a small exhaust pipe. It doesn't look important. Most people assume it's just a vent. It isn't. That opening belongs to something called the Auxiliary Power Unit, or simply the APU. Think of it as a miniature jet engine living quietly inside the tail of the plane. But unlike the big engines hanging under the wings, the APU isn't there to make the airplane fly. Its job is to make sure the airplane can function. Think about everything that's already working before your flight even begins. The cabin lights are on, the air conditioning is running, passengers are charging their phones, pilots are programming the flight computers, the cockpit displays are glowing. Yet the main engines haven't even started. So where is all of that power coming from? The APU. It generates electricity and compressed air while the aircraft is still on the ground, allowing the airplane to operate without relying on equipment at the airport.
That's especially critical at smaller airports where ground power simply isn't available. But here's where the APU becomes even more impressive. Its job doesn't end after takeoff. If an aircraft suffers an electrical failure or, in a serious emergency, loses an engine, the APU can be started in flight to provide backup power. You may remember the miracle on the Hudson in 2009. An Airbus A320 struck a flock of birds shortly after takeoff and lost both engines. Both of them. In those terrifying seconds, the crew activated the APU. It kept the flight controls alive long enough for Captain Sullenberger to land safely on the river. Every single person on board survived. The APU was one of the reasons they did. It's one more safety net in an industry built around the idea that one backup is never enough. That tiny exhaust in the tail is easy to walk past without a second thought, yet every flight depends on it. Quick question before we continue. Has anything in this video surprised you so far? If it has, do me one small favor. Hit the like button. Not because it changes your day, but because it tells YouTube there are still people out there who genuinely enjoy learning how the world works. It takes you 1 second, and it helps videos like this reach thousands of other curious minds. All right, let's keep going.
Question 4. Why is the fuel stored inside the wings?
Now let's talk about something that surprises almost everyone when they first hear it. Why would engineers store thousands of gallons of highly flammable jet fuel inside the wings? At first, it sounds like the worst possible idea. Thin wings, full of fuel, bending in turbulence. Wouldn't it be safer inside the body of the airplane? Actually, no. And once you understand why, it's one of those decisions that makes complete sense. The biggest reason is balance. As fuel burns throughout a long flight, the aircraft gets lighter. If all of that fuel were stored in the fuselage, that constant weight shift would throw the aircraft's balance off as the flight progressed. Storing fuel inside the wings keeps the weight close to where the lift is actually being produced, making the aircraft far more stable from takeoff to landing. But here's the part that most people never consider. The fuel actually helps protect the wings themselves. During flight, the wings experience enormous upward force as they generate lift. That force puts tremendous stress on the point where the wings connect to the fuselage. Having fuel distributed throughout the wings acts as a counterweight, pushing back against that bending force and reducing the stress on the structure. In simple terms, the fuel isn't just cargo. It's part of the engineering. It's holding the wing together from the inside. And despite what many people assume, wings are also one of the safest places for fuel during an accident. They're designed to absorb impacts differently from the main cabin, reducing the risk of fuel reaching the passenger compartment. So, yes, the airplane is carrying thousands of gallons of jet fuel, but it's carrying it in exactly the place the engineers wanted it all along.
Question 5. Why do the wings bend so much?
Now that we've talked about what's inside the wings, let's talk about something that makes a lot of passengers genuinely nervous. You're sitting by the window, the airplane hits turbulence, you glance outside, and the wing bends. Not just a little. Sometimes several feet in each direction. For a moment, it almost looks like it's made of rubber. Your first thought probably is, that cannot be normal. Actually, it's exactly what engineers designed it to do. Most people associate strength with rigidity. If something bends, we assume it's weak. But airplanes don't work that way. Think about a storm. Which tree survives? The one that bends with the wind, or the one that refuses to move at all? Almost always, it's the flexible one. The rigid tree snaps. Airplane wings follow the same principle. If the wings were completely rigid, the sudden forces from turbulence would concentrate in a single point, creating stress that over time could cause structural failure.
Instead, the wings flex. They spread those forces across the entire structure. The bending is the protection. It's a feature, not a flaw. In fact, before a new airplane is ever certified to carry passengers, engineers deliberately bend the wings far beyond anything they'll ever experience during a real flight. Hydraulic machines bend them upward to about 150% of their maximum expected load. The wingtips flex so dramatically during these tests that they almost look like they're about to snap, but they don't because they were built for it. So the next time your airplane hits turbulence and you see the wings moving, don't panic. That movement isn't a sign that something is wrong. It's proof that everything is working exactly as it should. By the way, I'm genuinely curious. Where in the world are you watching this from right now? Seriously, every time I upload a video like this, I'm amazed by how many different countries show up in the comments. So let me know. Drop your city, your country, or even the airport you're sitting in if you're waiting for a flight. I read far more of those comments than you'd probably expect. Now, let's talk about that bump on the roof.
Question 6. What is that bump on top of the airplane? 30 years ago, if you told someone they'd be streaming video from 7 miles above the Atlantic Ocean, traveling at 600 miles per hour, they would have laughed at you. Today, millions of passengers do it every single flight. And it's all possible because of something most people have never even looked at. Take a close look at the top of many modern airplanes. You'll often see a small raised bump sitting on the fuselage. Not the dramatic upper deck hump on a Boeing 747. Something much smaller, more subtle. Almost like someone slid a small sealed box just under the skin of the aircraft. That structure is called a radome, and inside it are antennas communicating in real time with satellites hundreds of miles above the Earth. For years, in-flight internet was a painful experience, barely faster than dial-up, outrageously expensive, completely unavailable over oceans. The problem was distance. Traditional satellites sit in geostationary orbit, roughly 22,000 miles above the Earth. That enormous distance creates significant signal delays and severely limits how much data can move at once. But that's changing rapidly. New generations of satellites now orbit just a few hundred miles above the surface, dramatically closer. That shorter distance means lower delays, faster speeds, and a far smoother experience for passengers. We're talking speeds that can handle video calls and streaming in the middle of an ocean crossing. Of course, installing these systems isn't cheap. Airlines often invest hundreds of thousands of dollars equipping a single aircraft with modern satellite connectivity. Then there are ongoing service fees on top of that. But passenger expectations have shifted. People now expect to stay connected even while flying over open ocean. And all of it, every video, every message, every call, depends on that one small bump on the roof of the aircraft that most travelers walk past without a second glance. Question 7. Why do airplane tires smoke when they land? Now let's talk about something you've almost certainly seen. An airplane touches down, the wheels meet the runway, and for just a split second, a cloud of smoke appears. It almost looks like the tires are on fire. If you've ever wondered whether something went wrong, you're not alone. But that puff of smoke is one of the most normal things that happens during every single landing. Here's why. Before touchdown, the airplane's wheels aren't spinning. They're simply hanging beneath the aircraft, completely stationary. Meanwhile, the airplane itself is racing toward the runway at roughly 150 miles per hour. The instant those stationary tires touch the ground, they have to go from 0 to over 150 miles per hour in less than 1 second. That's not braking,
That's the opposite. It's brutal, instantaneous acceleration. That sudden, violent friction generates enormous heat, and that heat creates smoke. So what you're seeing isn't a mistake, it's physics. Aircraft tires are among the toughest ever built. Each one carries extraordinary weight, inflated to pressures several times higher than a typical car tire, and designed to survive hundreds of landings under tremendous stress. They don't last forever. Airlines inspect them constantly, and they're replaced long before they ever become unsafe. So the next time you see that little puff of smoke during landing, you'll know exactly what you're looking at. Thousands of pounds of rubber catching up with a machine traveling faster than a Formula One car in under a second.
Question 8. How can an airplane fly with only one engine? Let's be honest. This is probably one of the biggest fears people carry quietly onto every flight. What happens if an engine fails? Movies don't exactly help. They often make it seem like losing an engine means the airplane immediately begins falling. Reality is completely different. Modern passenger airplanes are designed from the very beginning to keep flying safely, even if one engine stops working entirely. Before any aircraft is certified, manufacturers have to prove it can safely take off, climb, cruise, and land after losing one engine. Pilots train for these exact scenarios repeatedly in simulators, not because engine failures are common, but because in aviation, preparation is everything. And here's something most passengers never realize. Even if an airplane somehow lost all of its engines, it still wouldn't simply fall out of the sky. It would become a glider, a very large, very capable glider. Modern airliners can travel remarkable distances without any engine power at all. Depending on altitude, some can travel for well over 100 miles before needing to land. That's exactly what happened during several famous emergencies, where skilled crews safely brought aircraft down despite losing all engine thrust. The engines provide power. They don't hold the airplane up. The wings do that. And the wings keep doing that with or without engines running. Understanding that changes the way you think about flying completely.
Question 9. How does something this heavy stay in the air? At first glance, airplanes shouldn't exist. Think about it. A fully loaded passenger jet can weigh hundreds of tons. Yet somehow, it races down a runway, lifts cleanly off the ground, and cruises through the sky for hours without effort. It almost feels like magic. But the real answer is even more incredible than magic. Every airplane in flight is balancing 4 invisible forces at the same time: lift, weight, thrust, and drag. Weight is gravity pulling the aircraft toward the ground. Thrust comes from the engines, pushing it forward. Drag is the air resisting that forward motion. And lift is what the wings create. As the airplane moves forward, air flows around the carefully engineered shape of each wing. The pressure above the wing drops. The pressure below remains higher. That difference produces an upward force, and that force is lift. The faster the airplane moves, the more lift the wings generate. That's why airplanes need long runways. They're building enough speed for the wings to do exactly what they were designed to do. And here's the part that surprises almost everyone. The engines don't lift the airplane. They simply move it forward fast enough for the wings to take over. The engines provide the speed. The wings provide the flight. It's one of the most common misconceptions in aviation. And once all 4 forces come into balance, something extraordinary happens. A machine weighing hundreds of tons feels almost weightless. It's one of humanity's greatest engineering achievements. not because it defies physics, but because it uses physics so perfectly that we've forgotten to be amazed by it.
Here's what I find most remarkable about airplanes. It's not just that they fly, it's that almost nothing about them is accidental. The white paint, the rounded windows, that tiny bleed hole in the glass, the quiet exhaust in the tail, the fuel hidden inside the wings, the way those wings flex in turbulence, the small bump on the roof, even the puff of smoke when the tires touch the runway. Every single detail exists because someone asked a question. How can we make this safer? How can we make it lighter? How can we make it cheaper to run? How can we make sure this never fails again? Sometimes those answers came from brilliant ideas developed over years of testing. Other times, they came from hard lessons that cost lives. And that's what makes aviation different from almost everything else we've built. It's an industry that never stops learning. Every accident is investigated. Every failure is studied. Every lesson becomes a permanent improvement. Because of that, modern air travel has become one of the safest forms of transportation humanity has ever created, which is extraordinary when you stop and really think about it. So the next time you're sitting by the window on a flight, don't immediately reach for your phone. Take just 30 seconds. Look at the wing outside your window. Look at the shape of the glass beside you. Listen for the quiet hum of the airplane before the engines even start. Think about the thousands of engineers, pilots, mechanics, and researchers whose work made that moment possible. Because once you know the stories behind these details, you stop seeing an airplane as just another way to get from one place to another. You start seeing one of the greatest things humanity has ever built. And somehow, flying becomes even more extraordinary than it already was.
If you made it all the way to the end of this video, I genuinely appreciate you. It tells me you're the kind of person who isn't satisfied with just the surface of things. And honestly, those are my favorite people to make videos for. Now, one small ask. If you know someone who's nervous about flying, share this video with them. Because a lot of fear comes from not understanding how something actually works. And sometimes knowing the science is enough to make it a little less frightening. It costs you nothing to share, but for that person, it might make a real difference. If this is your kind of content, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on so you don't miss what's coming next. And you don't even need to go looking for it. There's a playlist sitting right there on your screen. Click on it. I think you're going to enjoy what's inside. Until next time, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.